Okay, good morning, everybody. It's 8 a.m. I will call the meeting of the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District to order. Welcome all of our guests. We have 8 members in the room, and we have 1 member participating virtually. That's Commissioner Rummel, who's participating virtually. Welcome to our guests. Janelle, would you like to go through the meeting guidance?
Certainly. Good morning, Commissioners, members of the public. Let me just bring this down a bit. That's a little better. Good morning, Commissioners, members of the public, and staff. To help us have a smooth meeting, I'm going to review just a few rules for all to please follow. Number 1, while the Commission and staff are in person, we're still offering a Zoom option so members of the public can attend. If you're attending virtually and like to speak, please do so during appearances by the public. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube, and the public chat has been disabled, but you can still send messages to the host if need be. And finally, for commissioners at the table today, please note that only 3 mics can be live at a time, and you should be able to speak once pushing the green button on the microphone. With that, those are the rules for today's meeting. Let's have a great meeting, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Janelle. Michael, any announcements?
No announcements this morning.
Okay. We'll move on. Are there any appearances by the public? Anybody in the room? Don't see anyone. Okay, is there anybody virtually? Nope. Okay, so we'll move on to the consent calendar, where we have the approval of the minutes from the last meeting, approval of the cash statement operating fund, expedited boundary annexation in the Village of DeForest at State Highway 19 and U.S. Highway 51. We have several sanitary sewer extension plans, 5 of them. Let's see, review of bids and award a contract for potential increase in total project cost for the West Interceptor Shorewood Relief Phase 3. And approve transaction amount and professional services amendment with regarding that West Interceptor for construction services. So, do we have any questions on any of those items before we get a motion?
Found one little tiny typo in the minutes. At 4A, we don't have Michael's last name spelled correctly. I know you wanted to make sure I was paying attention, Janelle. I read it. Yep. I read through it.
Thank you, Ezra. Anybody else?
Otherwise, I'll move approval of the consent calendar with that quick fix to the minutes.
Motion by Commissioner Meyer, second by Commissioner Wilson to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Okay, that will take us to topics where we have the review of the proposals award a contract for municipal financial advisor services. Bill?
Good morning. Bill Walker, Deputy Executive Director and Director of Budget and Planning. Here to ask you for $50,000 in transaction authority and permission to sign a contract with PFM as our municipal advisor. This item was before you last time, as you know, and I'm sorry I wasn't here, but I do want to thank Todd for ably filling in for me. As I understand it, you had a bunch of questions and discussion points, all of which you resolved except a couple relating to essentially the value of a municipal advisor. Questions like, are there funding options other than bonding? Does an advisor save us money on net? And can bond counsel do the work of a financial advisor? So I want to address those questions by talking a little bit more generally about what a municipal financial advisor is for. The real point of a financial advisor is not to secure better rates, but they are fiduciary, so they have an obligation and they're well suited to do that. The real point of an advisor is to help us do financing at all, to choose the right mix of financing, whether it's bonds or loans or something else, with the right terms, the right time, and to manage finances over multiple years. These are things that staff can't do and bond counsel can't do either. I wrote a lot about this in the car, and I want to boil it down to this point. financing a capital program where you're using only cash and clean water fund loans is so easy that even amateurs like me can do it. When you add any other kind of financing, bonds, commercial loans, WIFIA loans, whatever it is, it's so complicated that only professionals can do it. And I gave a bunch of reasons for that in the card, but I want to highlight two here. The first is bond pricing. If bonds are in your mix, issuing a bond means selling it into a market or placing it directly with a buyer. And to do that, to get a good price, you have to know the market, or you have to know the set of potential direct placement buyers. Municipal advisors engage with that market, and they know buyers all the time. They are issuing bonds, they're meeting with underwriting desks, they're tracking and analyzing prices, they've got their own financial models for the markets. They know how to structure bonds to meet market needs, they know how to time bonds. I and my team can do none of these things. Even if we could do the literal steps to issue a bond, which we can't, there's no way we could get good pricing on our own. The second example is the issue of ratings targeting. Again, if you're doing bonds, you need a rating. Ratings are influenced by all sorts of factors: reserve levels, financial policies, your management policies, your debt level, type of debt. Municipal advisors have, again, experience with rating agencies. They can advise clients on how to get a good rating. And some, presumably all advisors, CFM included, they have their own mimic models, as it were, of the rating agencies. So they can do analysis in real time. Well, client, if you lowered your debt level a little bit, here's what it would do to your rating agency, your rating with Fitch, here's what it would do to Moody's, et cetera. We could only guess at those things. I can read the Fitch's guide, for instance, what it says, but I don't know how the factors work. What we would have to do is make some changes and then go get rated again. And that's expensive, and it could take years, especially with things like debt service or debt level changes. So what I'm trying to convey is that I and my staff and everyone else at the district are completely unqualified to do bonding. And the same thing is true for commercial loans. In some ways, loans of the size we're talking about are more difficult than bonds. I also want to make another point here, which is a little bit triggered by the idea of a commercial loan, and that's the issue of fiduciary duty. I read a lot about financial markets. They're really unforgiving places. Buyers and lenders are looking to their own interests, and they are really quick to exploit errors by their counterparties. It's kind of a cutthroat world. So from what I understand from GFOA, Government Financial Officers Association, and other reading and talking with our bond counsel, commercial lending is not competitive in the sense that it's not public. You have to go talk to a lender individually, and they have no obligation to help us. They'll be to give us good rates. They'll do so to the extent that we're savvy and knowledgeable. My point here is we're neither of those things. So a municipal advisor, the whole industry exists to advocate for utilities and municipalities in these matters, to be the voice at the table that's talking for utility and helping them get good terms. So I want to kind of move to closing here by putting this in personal terms, explain a little bit why I care about this. My job, one of them, is to make sure the district is able to sustainably finance its capital program. That means not running out of money, not overspending on debt, not collecting too much in service charges, not being vulnerable to a financial surprise. And the reason that my team and I sought a municipal advisor is that even working together, the help of my great team, we can't do that job. We literally cannot make sure that we have a good financial program once we move beyond clean water fund loans. So my sense of the questions that were left from last time is that they're kind of in the same space. Would having staff or bond counsel do bond financing or do loan financing, would that be a good choice for us? What are the advantages of that? But what I'm trying to say is that's not actually an option at all. There's nothing to analyze there. we couldn't do it. The real options facing the district at this point are get a municipal advisor, which is the recommendation. Stop $30 to $40 million in capital projects, and I'm quite serious about it. Cancel contracts, stop the work, or raise service charges next year by the tune of whatever, $30 to $40 million at once. Cash finance, in other words. This is the reasoning that got us as a team to, hey, the best choice is a municipal advisor. And that's, of course, supported by the fact that the industry exists, and that's what we're trying to do. So I wasn't here last time. I hope I've answered your questions, but let me know what I missed or what else you want to hear.
Tom?
You didn't answer my question, but the memo did. So I don't think we were concerned, or at least I wasn't concerned about staff doing a lot of this work, or bond counsel certainly doing it. That was not something that I thought was going to happen. What I was concerned was we were just thinking about bonds. So what you've got in your memo says, staff seeks services of a municipal advisor to ensure that the district obtains the most advantaged mix of financing at the right times and on the right terms. And that's all I needed to hear. That I know we need advice. So I'm not concerned about that. Last time it was just like we were looking at bonding and that was going to be it. And I'm like, there's other options that maybe we should. So all my questions from last time were answered by this wonderful memo that was written. So I'm good with that. Thank you.
I thought the memo was great, and I don't have any additional questions related to the resolution. The memo also indicated that there would be other fees associated with getting this work done, like paying a rating agency and a bond counsel and other administrative fees, whatever those might be. Any idea what additional costs we're looking at for rating agency, for example, or bond counsel? I think at the last time somebody suggested it might be like $5,000. No?
It'd probably be
Or
more,
maybe it was
more like 15,
okay.
maybe 20.
But anyway, Bill?
I'll do my best to answer that. The short answer is I don't actually know. We got some indication from the various firms that applied. The ballpark here is a little similar to PFM's fees. So $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 bond counsel, $25,000, $50,000 ratings agencies. There are various listing. I don't even know what the right term here is, but like listing fees with various markets. I don't know what those are. But for the record, the reason we didn't include those fees here, what we were trying to accomplish with this item is make sure that the Commission is comfortable with the general idea of working with PFM in particular. And when we get to the point of whatever we're doing, bonds, loans, whatever, come back with additional transaction authority to make sure that that activity is the correct one. We didn't want to just go ahead with PFM without some warning.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Marcia, but I want to make a comment on that. So we will have these other expenses, and having to go out and get rated by a Standard & Poor's or Moody's or something can be rather expensive. And I would hope that the PMF, is that
PFM.
would take into account those costs as to what's better going in, as Tom mentioned, to a bank or savings and loan or something, compared to how how that weighs. And so we would expect that they would do that.
Yes, and yes, to confirm that, just for the record, that's what we're hiring them to do. Give us advice on the entire mix of financing, when to do things, impacts of that mix on ratings, our reserves, our revenue requirements, our project schedules, all of that stuff together.
I do agree that what Tom read, that one sentence, that's what caught my eye too. It answered the question. Okay, Commissioner Rummel?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I missed the discussion last week, and I thought the memo was really helpful. You know, wearing my city hat, I know when we sell municipal bonds, we sometimes get a premium, and I know just enough to say that without all the details, but I'm wondering if for a utility bond, if that's the same situation. So then the city council then could take that premium and it's extra money. It's sort of part of the market. You know, that it's a little, I don't want to say kickback, but it's a thing that comes back to us that we could use in capital projects. And I'm wondering if we know that that is, we're eligible as a utility for that kind of situation.
Commissioner Rommel, I'm going to put that in the category of things I have no idea how to answer. I'm not sure I understand the question, in fact, but I'm pretty sure PFM can advise us on that.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Commissioner Wilson?
I was gonna make a motion if that's acceptable. I make a motion that we, adopt the resolution that's included here, awarding a contract to Municipal Financial Advisors. Give them $50,000.
Second.
Oh, I should have my mic on. Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Wilson, seconded by Commissioner Murphy to approve the award of contract PFM for the Municipal Financial Advisor Services. Any further comments or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
I
Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. It'll be interesting to see how this works because we've never been out for bonds before and how we get rated. We've never been rated or anything. So it'll be really interesting to see how all of that works because typically first entries into the market are not treated real well. But
I do want to take this opportunity to make one more point there, and I think Todd may have made this. This is a warning, which is that when you get into the bond game, your requirements for reserves may be different than they used to be, and that may require some more revenue collection in the short.
thanks for that heads up, and you are correct. That's one of the big things they look at, yeah. Okay, let's see, we will then go to item B, the action on the Executive Director Search Committee. We did not meet this morning. We do not expect to meet next week, or the next meeting on the 13th of June. And that the reason is because the RFP has just gone out for the search firm. There's a couple weeks there, and then then we have to rate them. What we have found out is that that will have to be a public process. So what was recommended is we have one of our subcommittee or another commission member help rank the firms along with 2 staff members. We would discuss the top 4 or 5 in open session, and then we might be able to do interviews in closed session because that's obviously becomes more of a bargaining type of thing. So we'll have to probably decide on who we want to do that unless somebody wants to volunteer. So there'll be 2, and Mike Lipsky has a matrix that they've created that can be used by the people doing the evaluation, progressive points for how well you score on different criteria that are basically laid out in the RFP. So does everybody understand that? So if anybody wants to volunteer, let me know. The second thing is we have had 6 commission members take this survey, so thank you very much for those doing that. And there's a few more left. I remind you that I think there's a few more days left to get that done. That's very important information for us, and we do have, I think, Amanda, can you update us where we sit with the other outreach?
Can I do that in our presentation? Because that's what I'm going to talk about in the budget process improvements. I'll talk a little bit about focus groups.
Okay, then you can do it then.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. Okay. Anybody have any questions on the search process? So next meeting will probably be at 8 a.m. because we don't anticipate having another subcommittee because of the search firm things being done, and we wouldn't have evaluations completed by then. And so the second meeting in June, we'll probably have a subcommittee meeting, go through the search firms or decide what we do with them, and to, maybe we might have all of the public input back by then. We're not sure yet. We'll find out. Okay? So, anybody have any questions on what we're doing? No? Okay. Thanks, everybody. That will take us to, Todd. You're gonna give us a update on the 2023 collection system facilities plan.
Good morning, Todd Giebert, Capital Planning Manager. Going to be joined too by Jen Hurlbus, our collection system engineer. Jen is that better? Jen came to our department, transferred into our department about a year ago. We started working on this plan at that time. So today's update is timely, I guess, for a couple of reasons. Number one, just to tell you the work we've done in the past year or so. And also, maybe more importantly, is Bill and Amanda just alluded, the next item on the agenda starts off the budget improvement process. And the collection system facilities plan is a key part of the CIP and the capital budget. So it seemed like a good time to kind of kick off the budget season. Sure, I don't think so. Give it to you. So today we want to really just try to answer three basic questions. Number one, what is a collection system facilities plan, in case you didn't know we had one? Why do we do it? And then kind of some of the key features that are in the plan. Next slide. So really a kind of high overview of the plans, kind of planning we do in the planning department are shown here. At the very top is the master plan. And these are all defined by the planning horizons generally in the scope of the projects. But master plans, we did our last one in 2009. So fairly recently, and collection system planning was a big part of that. Dealt with issues like watershed balancing, effluent reuse, effluent return, those kinds of things. Facility planning has a much smaller time frame, 20 years generally. For our plan, we're just looking at the collection system. That is the interceptor sewers, pumping stations, and force mains. It doesn't include any of the assets here at the plant or any of our effluent force mains. We did the first plan in 2002 and an update in 2011, both done entirely by district staff. So we try to do them on a cycle more like 10 to 15 years rather than 20 years, just to keep them current, because they depend largely on U.S. Census data as population projections. And then those facility plans in turn feed our CIP, which has a much smaller time frame of usually less than 6 years. So why do we do it? There's two big reasons. The first is it's a requirement for plan approval by the DNR. All projects that are reviewable by the DNR need to get this approval. We're most familiar with the treatment plan projects usually in facility plans. These are the large additions or major projects that we see that have a very definite planning period. It could be 1 to 2 years even. But collection system projects also require this. Some are more complex than others, but they all have to go through this process. So the end result is every project that has a Clean Water Fund loan has to have a facility plan attached to it. So for our plan, it's a little different, it's a little unique because we're looking at the whole system. We're not just looking at one project or one process. We're looking at the entire service area of 190 square miles, trying to figure out questions like, what is the condition of our assets and what do we need to do? So we're answering those, basically those two bullet points that the DNR lists there. The last two, evaluate options to address needs and identify alternatives. Those really have to be done closer to when the project is initiated in design. But the facility plan is a key part of this process. The second reason we do it, as I mentioned, is for the capital improvements plan. That table at the top is from our last update in 2011, and it basically shows the output, the recommended project list from the plan. So we list the projects on the left by service area, and then we break them down into time periods that we think that they'll be needed with dollar amounts attached to them. And the table below is just to show how we followed the plan in the last 10 years or so, or from 2010 to 2020. You can see the 36 projects recommended in the plan. We thought they would be roughly $112 million. And The row below that shows that of those 36 we completed or started in that time period, 29 of them at a cost of around $100 million. So it really is a key feeder into our CIP. So the topics in the plan are arranged by chapter, and here's the ones that we're working on for the 2023 plan. The two that are started are the kind of the main drivers of the plan, that being capacity assessments and condition. I'll talk about capacity in general, follow up with condition. And then some of the other chapters are kind of emerging topics that are also addressed. And I should also note that we hired Strand engineers to help us with some of those other ones that you see, the volume of the plan. So before talking about capacity and condition, it's important to note the age of our system. This was kind of telling to me. I kind of knew this intuitively, but when you see it on the graph, it kind of stands out. This is the length of our interceptor system installed by decade. And you can see, obviously, 50% of our system, over 50%, was installed in the 60s and 70s. And over 70%, dates before 1980. So it is an aging system. And the important thing to note is, obviously, condition, as we all get older, assets decline. To be kind, some of them can't be renewed. Grim truth. But it also affects capacity because when interceptors are installed, they have a life or excess capacity life of about 40 to 50 years. It's not indefinite. And if you do the math on 1960, 1970, that's kind of coming due right about now. Next slide, Amanda. So the way we evaluate capacity, we work with CARPC. They are a key player, or have been to date, in helping us do this. They provide what we call our collection system evaluation just prior to all our facility planning efforts. So in this process, they essentially, you see the graphic at the right, that's our service area broken down by smaller subbasins. What CARPC does is they take those basins and they allocate population projections to those basins, and looking at land uses, our customers' comp plans. They generate flow rates and then route them through our system to identify areas where there's capacity needs. Next slide, Amanda. So the output from that is shown in this figure here. There's a whole slew of these figures in their evaluation, but generally they are all the same. They're color-coded traffic light designations. So red areas are luckily we don't have many of those, but they're obviously short-term urgent needs. Yellow is warning, meaning the next 5 to 10 years, improvements are needed. Then anything green is over past year 2030. So I'm happy to report that overall our system is in pretty good shape. We don't have a lot of these colors, brighter colors, but there are 3 systems that are shown on the right that do need attention. The first one, the West Interceptor Relief, is kind of wrapping up actually. You actually just approved the last phase of an 8-phase project for the West Interceptor system. This essentially starts from Brittingham Park and goes all the way out University Avenue to Whitney Way. So we're kind of just completing that final leg. The next system, Northeast Interceptor, Wanakee, is from the Hara River right up into the village of Wanakee. That'll be a phased project over the next 10 to 15 years. But the most critical one is the last one, the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor, and that's actually what this graphic here is showing, the very start of it. So this is just actually out the window, down the hill. Starts at our station, pump station 11, and extends west about 5 miles. And the plan there is over the next probably 15 to 20 years in several phases to provide capacity relief to that system. Other things related to capacity that we're looking at are infill development and increased density. So this is an example of one in the city of Madison. Kind of been in the news lately, the rapid transit routes and new zoning district that was created to allow higher density along that transit route. This was introduced as a concept, the city's comp plan, I think in 2018, just about the time CARPC's plan was wrapping up, so it didn't get incorporated. So one thing we're looking at with our facility plan is to make adjustments and modifications, see how it impacts our facilities. Slide. And I'll just wrap up by talking about 2 more quick topic areas related to system resiliency and redundancy. So the photo on the left, obviously, is an overflow that happened in one of our customer systems. This is from the August 2018 event, just showing the effects of climate change and more intense storms that we've seen, almost 10 inches of rain in a very short time frame. The one thing that Strand is working on is modeling the effects of these larger, intense storms on our system and seeing, do we need to make full-scale changes in our collection system, essentially bigger sewers, or can we do it on a more case-by-case basis? And their early findings are it's more of the latter. It need to be a system-wide shift. Then the photo on the right is we're also working on developing a plan for standby generators at all of our pumping stations. This will be phased in over many years. Right now, we're essentially putting these in at stations where we're doing major work, rehabs. I think we've installed 3 so far. And I will note that the storm we had last week, one of our pump stations, Station 18, lost power and the generator kicked on, and probably no one even really thought about it. So it's working. With that, I will turn it over to Jen for the conditions.
I'll just stay. So as Todd mentioned, there's kind of 2 main parts of this facility plan, the capacity and then the condition assessment. And for condition assessment, we're breaking it into interceptors, gravity, pump stations, and then force mains as part of the entire collection system. So just to transition into this, I just wanted to kind of show an example of one of the inspections of a gravity interceptor. This is a case where it's not the traditional TV truck and cleaning equipment. This is an area that's difficult to access. It's marshy and wet, and so about the only time we can get out there with an all-terrain vehicle and at least a camera is when the ground is frozen in the winter. So what we do, and can you click, for the gravity interceptors, so that's 98 miles of the 145 miles of pipe that we have in our system. So every year, annual TV and clean, our goal is to at least do 10%. We have been getting a little bit more than that, except for some of these areas where it's difficult to access, and we keep trying. And so we do a little bit extra in other areas. So for condition assessment, we're obviously this year, this is kind of a new addition, is doing full risk assessment. And so part of that is the likelihood of failure, which is that condition score. And that we are using, we are taking that televising, which also a new feature. We have started using artificial intelligence to do that defect coding, and that is providing consistency. So one of the challenges we've had, even though we've been collecting 20 years worth of data, is that people are still subjective, even if they're trained into doing. So there's over 260 defect codes that you have to use in order to generate that score. And so, you know, you're in the truck, you're trying to take the video, then you pause, you got to type, you got to remember. So there was inconsistencies depending on, you know, who was doing that over the years. So we made the move to transition into new software that utilizes the that artificial, it's basically machine learning to then take that subjectivity out. So even if it's not 100% accurate, it's at least consistent, which is better for planning. So we follow the industry standard for the pipeline assessment condition scoring. And then the part that's new is that we wanted to put some actual like data and methodology to this consequence of failure to then do that risk assessment. So we started with the recommendations in the industry standards and ran through that exercise and recognized that our system, because we're more of a regional interceptor system, is a little bit different. And so we kind of adjusted some of our criteria to make it more what made sense for our system. So those 5 categories that we looked at are listed up there. And so we assigned basically a score, and then we did some weighting and a calculation to come up with a value. So if you can go to the next slide, this is the assessment. So we have over 1,500 pipes. So there's a score for each pipe segment, but what we did to do the analysis is we grouped those pipe segments by age, material, about the same age of year. So it kind of starts grouping them into projects. You know, an interceptor system was installed together as a project, length of pipe. That's then typically what we were using to come up with what was the average score for that interceptor system. And so, you know, luckily there's nothing in the red. Obviously we missed something. Very little into the orange. Those projects are already programmed in the CIP and have been for a couple of years. So that by length is 1% of the system in the orange. So the yellow is really what we're talking about for facility planning. Those are the types of projects that we should really be thinking about over the next 15 to 20 years. And that accounts for about 34% of the system. And so, you know, I think, you know, overall we're in pretty good shape. We've, you know, continued to look at that. But as Todd noted, you know, over 50% of the system is in that age, you know, built in the 60s and 70s. Some of that has already been addressed or is being programmed in, but, you know, that's what we're really looking at right now. And to note, obviously the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor that Todd mentioned has capacity concerns. It also is about 11,000 feet of that, you know, in the yellow. So there's, you know, some overlap in some of that. Yeah.
So my question, is this done by segments? So by your construction type of thing, or?
They're grouped.
You know, because some interceptors,
yep,
you know, we keep adding on to.
Yeah, they're more grouped by like similar age, material, and diameter.
Okay.
Yep. So then we also did the similar risk assessment for pumping stations. So quite a few more categories, I guess, in the likelihood of failure. I'll note, obviously, the capacity was still acknowledged as part of that. Power system redundancy is its own chapter in the facility plan. So there's a lot more detail that goes into that, but utilize that information and data as part of kind of this scoring for a condition assessment. And then we interviewed district O&M staff to discuss the mechanical, structural, HVAC was new, we added that in, and then electrical condition. And I'll note that electrical condition, we actually broke out into two categories. So general, like electrical gear, has a lifespan of about 30 years, but now controls, we've been adding a lot more controls recently in these pump stations, and that has a shorter life of about 15 years. And then for consequence of failure, we also did kind of put some math to this and evaluated what is their average daily volume, obviously higher volume, higher risk, and then how long can a station be down, and then diversion options. So there's certain stations where we do, like pump station 18 has a generator, but it also has the option to fully divert flow to pump station 7 if it needs to, and it can be shut down. So next slide. So the result of that, I think this really shows the amount of work that has gone in doing all of those station rehabs. We're kind of nearing the end of full station rehabs, and so most of those you'll see down in the green. The four groupings up above, Station 17 and Station 4, are currently in construction for improvements or rehabilitation. And so then that leaves us with Pump Station 3. It's right here at the plant. It hasn't been really touched. And Pump Station 16, that was built in 1982 out in Middleton, is kind of the next big rehab on the list. And then that smaller group, or the lower group in the yellow, those are where we're getting into more of smaller types of improvements that are needed, whether it's for electrical upgrades or like Pump Station 10, a lot of that driver is like, you know, backup generation or some other types of work that might need to be done, some valving work, things like that. So I think we're seeing that the end of the big full rehabs and starting to see smaller projects, especially for those electrical control upgrades. Next slide. So then force main condition assessment, this is a chapter that Strand is more taking the lead on this and helping with that. So there was a previous study done, that was completed in 2017. They took that, full study and just, look, there's new technology. Force main condition assessment really is new in our industry. People are just starting to do this. So there's, limitations of technology. It's very difficult to do an assessment of a force main when you're dealing with the amount of flow and that you need it to keep running and in operation. So if you can't, do that, you're talking bypassing. You're trying to get some sort of inspection tool into the flow. So it's complicated and it's expensive. And so the two that we've identified to do next would be Pump Station 10 and Pump Station 15. So 10, the criticality there is it's, our second largest by volume pump station. And we have already replaced the last about 2,000 feet of that force main a few years ago, but we want to inspect the remaining of that to help us make some decisions on what type of redundancy or what we need to do for that station. And then 15, obviously, in light of the force main break that we had last year, we want to make sure that we're taking a look at that for that assessment. So the timeline in the next couple of years is hoping to get those two inspected. Next. And then just wanted to briefly touch, there's quite a few maintenance topics that we are including in the plan, fats, oils, and grease, hydrogen sulfide monitoring, but I wanted to highlight access to facilities. So as that picture that I started with shows, that would be an example of what I would call a level 5. So level 5 is we can probably get to it to TV, but we cannot get cleaning equipment to it. And so, part of this is, we're supposed to be maintaining these systems, and there is risk involved then if we can't actually clean the sewer. But at least those, we can hopefully get some eyes on it and see. But then there is almost 2% of pipes where we can't even get out there. We really can't, and that is mostly in that Nine Springs Valley interceptor stretch through the marsh, basically. So, so this is something that we have elevated to the executive office, and I think there has been some discussions about discussing with DNR on some of these challenges that we're facing with being able to maintain our facilities. Next slide. So as Todd mentioned and showed, the outcome of the facility plan, after we've talked about all of these different topics, is to come up with quite a long list of projects of needs and then break them out over 5-period intervals in that 20-year planning horizon. And so our next steps is we should have a draft completed by the end of the year and then go through all of the approval processes the first half of next year. Any questions?
Any questions? I've got a couple. Could you go back to the interceptor slide where you have the ranking with the green, yellow, and the connection right there? Okay, a couple questions. First of all, how did you, what is have you graded this based on the likelihood of failure that you go from green to yellow, and how do you, understand the gradation, and could green be smaller, bigger, or whatever?
So I'm following basically this risk matrix that is the industry standard. So we have a rank, the y-axis is your condition score, and so that's a 1 to 6, and that is following that pipeline assessment condition, that the different defect codes and how that gets scored. And they actually come up with a bunch of different numbers. I use the overall
Okay.
score. And then
is like the green is that an industry standard that you're using?
Yeah.
How to determine the green, the
Sure,
yellow?
sorry. Yeah, so basically, a 1 through a 3 is considered pretty good.
Okay.
And when it gets into a 4 or 5, those are the ones that you should be looking at.
So my next question is, that's a snapshot in time, correct? That was
Yes.
like as of 2022 or?
As of, I would say, the end of 23.
Okay,
Yes.
end of 23. So that's a snapshot in time.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the greatest predictor of failure? Is it age, or is it some other factor?
Mm.
Well, the reason I'm asking is, if that's a 2022, and you're talking the yellow, you're saying those are things that should be addressed in the next 10 to 20, 15 to 20 years, I think you said.
Mm-hmm.
So my thinking is, how many of those in the green over the next 15 or 20 years are gonna move to the yellow? But
That's,
it's not gonna
yeah.
stay static.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
exactly. Well, and the data, right, is over a 10-year period if you're
Yeah.
really only hitting 10%. So it's a constant moving and evolving. So at least now that we have, I would say, a better system in place, that then we can update these scores and, you know, on, I would say, on an annual basis, and then kind of now that we have this methodology, it'll be easier to kind of update this analysis on a yearly basis when we get new available information.
Okay, that's helpful. So my last question is, are current methods and materials producing longer lasting interceptors? I remember being on the commission and, I think it was John Shelfer and Jim Nemke saying things like, some of the interceptors built in the 1920s and 30s were doing better than interceptors built in the 1960s and 70s, given the material that was used. So they used clay or something compared to concrete. And so I'm wondering, are we in a situation where now we're back to better materials than we had in the 60s and 70s? Or is this something where a 50, 60-year-old sewer still fails, or we can get 70, 80 years?
I'd say overall that's a fair assessment. I would agree with that. Our oldest sewer is over 100 years, and that's cast iron. I mean, the insides get to be a little, gnarly, but it's a sturdy pipe. The sewers that are the most concerned but are built in the 50s and the 60s are concrete that corrodes. We're not putting any of that in anymore. And we're putting in fiberglass, PVC, things that has good chemical resistance and corrosion resistance. So I think that's probably true. But we don't have 75 years experience with PVC either. So we kind of don't know what we don't know yet, but so far I think that's a fair assessment.
Thank you. Anybody else? None? Okay, well, thank you very much. It was informative. That will take us to Bill on the 2025 budget process improvements.
Morning again, Bill Walker, Deputy Executive Director. The pause was a little chatter over here on the corner. As Todd mentioned, we are kicking off the budget season formally here. The original idea was to have this introductory presentation in May, and then the collection system presentation in June, and then, as you'll see, a financial presentation in July. But schedules had us switch that around, so you're getting 2 in one day. What we want to do in this study session is give people an overview of the entire schedule of the budget, highlight some of the improvements that we are making, and get whatever feedback or guidance you have now on potential other improvements or questions you may have. I'm going to talk about schedule and improvements, and what I suspect you'll be more interested in, Amanda is going to talk about community engagement, communications, et cetera. So let's go to the timeline slide. Oh, I get my own clicker. Thank you. Alrighty. What I want to do with this slide is give people sort of a general picture of the overall process. It may even be useful as a reference later on. This is essentially the same process we've used in past years. And I'm grouping it into 4 lanes. Communications work, which Amanda will talk about, work that staff are doing, I want to highlight because backbone, the role of executive office and directors, and then the commission role. Showing just from May through November, we've been working since, depending how you count, January or February. I won't highlight that here. So as I said, Amanda's going to talk about comms later, but and you'll see this list when she talks, but I want to make sure you see it in the context. I want to talk about staff work. The budget process starts with capital improvements planning, CIP, and then moves into operating budget. So CIP is very staff intensive. It's it's managed by my department, budget and planning, but staff in engineering, operations, maintenance are working very extensively on business case development. And business cases are kind of the backbone, the building block of the CIP. The important thing is to make sure that for every project, there's a real clear sense of what the appropriate scope is, the appropriate schedule, what is the correct budget. Even for projects that are underway or that have already been planned, we update those business cases to make sure that we know what has changed. In June, we start working on operating budget stuff in earnest. Actually, I've been doing a little bit of stuff behind the scenes beforehand. This is when staff work really starts and financial planning starts. We do financial planning first for what we know about the capital program, kind of the big dog in the plan. We try to map out all of those projects, make an estimate of their cost, and we start to put together a financial plan that can make that work. In July, we're still doing that work, putting the finishing touches from the capital point of view. And then in August, we are, this year, a little bit different since we graciously approved the use of a municipal advisor. We're going to be working with them intensively at this point, try to figure out what we're doing in terms of bonding, loaning, et cetera. This is also where, again, behind the scenes, we start to do preliminary work on service charges. So just a quick review. Service charges are based on the flows and loadings, the components of the wastewater that are sent to the district by communities. We need to project what those will be in the coming year. And we use that projection later on, combined with our service charge requirement, to figure out what the actual rates will be. This projection work is a little bit involved. That's stuff that my department does. And then, of course, in September, the resource team, business services, gets heavily involved in producing the final document. All of the text, tables, the narrative, the story of the budget put together in a nice package. And then, of course, in October, we are finalizing rates and fee information. In November, we're sending that information to septic haulers. Closing thing. The executive office and director work, we've made an effort in the last couple of years to start with some formal internal guidance. It's relatively high level, but it's things like making sure everyone knows what the process is going to be and what staff roles are, what are the key kind of constraints that we're working on, or what are some of the things that we're focusing on. And we're finishing writing that right now, and we'll share it with directors soon. June, something that we started last year is to really run budget discussions through the group of directors. Every director thinks about what their current budget is and what they think changes they might need. We talk about those things together as a group, and we try to prioritize most important, what's least, what can we pause, what can we drop, both for spending and for potential new positions. Another thing we started doing last year is looking at position needs on a multi-year basis. We put together a list of every position we think we might need in the next 3, 4, 5 years, and again, try to prioritize those together. The executive office will make the final decision on what the exact CIP schedule is, what projects are going when, and then final decision on what is going to be in the draft operating budget. Then we get to the commission. Today in May, we're doing, as I said, these preview sessions. The next big event for you will be in July, where we're going to talk about financial stuff. How does the district's finances actually work? What are the factors that are driving things? What are the choices available to people? I'm pretty confident that's going to be informed by PFM's analysis. It may even come and give some information to you. And then, of course, the standard schedule. Introduce the budget, next meeting have a hearing, next meeting deliberate, and that's the overall schedule. To kind of emphasize what I'm trying to convey to everyone here, you and owner communities, is kind of integrated overall approach that we try to take to budgeting. Now I want to talk about some of the changes we're making. We try to improve things every year a little bit. And this year, the headline is that we are not going to do a draft capital improvements plan. So you're used to seeing this in July. That is, again, a very formal, published document with the capital plan and the capital plan, or the financing plan. The trouble with that draft was twofold. It took a lot of work to produce, particularly for the resource team and also for my department. And that could be better put into other things, really talking with PFM this year. It also had this problem of being out of date within a few months. The final budget document incorporates all of the content of the draft CIP. And we found, to our concern, that some outsiders, consultants, and even some staff would keep referring to the draft, which had numbers that were no longer correct. So we want to take that away and use the time for other things. And in particular, we want to do, instead of the only touch point being the CIP, the draft CIP, have some more tailored engagement with the commission. Today's meetings and, again, that financial session. Money is more interesting to the commission than projects are, generally speaking, and that's where the leverage is. Another thing we're doing a little bit more deliberately this year is thinking about how capital projects depend on one another. I've been here 8 years. I hear stories about how nice it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Far fewer capital projects, much less, fewer things to coordinate. Now we have a lot of projects. You heard about the collection system ones. The plant has a lot more. Getting those in the right order, knowing what has to go first, what can go second, how they need to be coordinated with one another, is much more difficult than it used to be. And so a team led by Eric Dundee and working with my department and subject matter experts in the other departments, we're really going through to make sure we have that correctly. And the real reason for this is it has been a challenge for us to program the pace of capital projects in a way that's realistic. And we want to get better at doing that, considering, again, what has to go first, what staffing capacity do we have, who specifically is doing each project so that we know that we can actually get this stuff done. And then there are improvements in communication.
Question, sure. You know, like 20, 30 years ago, when the district did projects at the plant, they were really big projects. There was a lot of stuff, you know, like I think when I started, it was like the 6th edition or 7th edition. And they were just a lot of stuff. And it's like every year they would plan and do a big project at the plant that took over many different aspects of operation, and they do an addition. And then it's like they complete that, then they start the planning for the next edition. Like they're always doing additions. So I think we kind of made the decision, at least with the plant, to kind of break things into smaller packages. You know, and you kind of see that with the liquid processing and stuff like that. Now, costs are going up, but, you know, back when we were doing those big additions, they were $40, $50 million additions, which they are probably a small amount of money, but back then were really big. And I think we've kind of broken things, we started breaking things apart. I don't remember when that was. What, was it after the 12th edition or something? 11th?
All right, Amanda Wagner, Communications and Public Affairs Director here at the district. So as Bill teed up and we talked about when he originally showed the schedule, really focused a lot more, hyper-focused on communications for this year. So I will be leading that. Bill and I are co-project managing the budget this year. We did last year as well, just kind of without those official project manager titles. But from a communications perspective, really deepening the coordination with executive office, directors, budget and planning, of course, and then a lot more community outreach and engagement. So as many of you are aware, we are conducting focus groups with our owner communities. So two focus groups with owner communities, one leadership and one was owner community staff. Those actually happened yesterday afternoon. I purposely opted to not be in the room so that the participants could have a very free discussion. And we hired a facilitator. HDR was our facilitator for those focus groups. And so again, I was not in the room, but top level budget, primary concern, number one. But we knew that. We knew that going into those focus groups. So really, as thinking about communications for the budget this year, more, earlier, and often. And we've already started to put some things in place. For instance, Commissioners Eskridge and Clark had conversation with the DCCVA Executive Council, I believe it was last week or late the week before. So we're starting to coordinate with them to really get them information and open up lines of communication about the budget. In addition to that, just thinking more broadly about how we communicate the value of the work that we do and the need for our infrastructure. So my colleague Amy Steger and I working on a very robust communications plan that we will be executing on over the next several months. Big piece though is really just that community outreach and engagement. They just want to know more and have those conversations and be aware of what's coming. And to the point about, you know, the assistance of Commissioner Clark and Commissioner Eskridge, one of the questions in the car is, how can commissioners be involved? You know, we produce the budget as staff, we bring it here to the commission, and then you all are appointed by certain bodies, right? And so to be able to have touch points through all of those channels and all of the individuals is really helpful. So one of the questions, again, is how commissioners want to be engaged, and definitely looking for your input, thoughts, what you're willing to bring to that. So we can really all have that conversation together, and that is just not happening in pockets. To go back to those focus groups for a second, I am actually really looking forward to the information that will come out of those focus groups. So Commission will get a presentation on those at the end of July. So certainly the data that we get, the insight we get from that will help inform the communications plan. We've got a framework now, but in terms of kind of putting a finer point on that, do anticipate that the data from the focus groups will put some tweaks to that. So a little bit more, but on that to come toward the end of July. And just kind of as a side note, which is not this presentation, about the executive director questions there. Those will also come to the commission, but separate, because that wasn't originally part of the focus group plan. So that will be coming as well. So just really great discussion. And the owner communities really appreciated the opportunity to have these focus groups. So I foresee it as something that we will be doing more often, or at a regular cadence in the future. So yeah, just really right now, developing the plan. We know full well that we should actually be talking about the budget throughout the year, not just during this planning process, not just in September, October, when we are bringing it to the commission. So really taking a fresh look at that, but with lots of great input from all the parties involved. So.
Sarah?
A quick timeline question, Amanda, maybe I missed it, and I'm sorry, I was trying to take notes and maybe not listening. Did you, remind me the timeline of when we're gonna get that feedback back from the focus groups and from the survey too, because I think we also are surveying them.
Yes, so, there's kind of two concurrent things going on, right? Because we added the executive director questions. So those, I don't have a deadline, I don't have a date for those. I'm hoping to get those before, but July 28th commission meeting is when, you will all receive, a report out on the focus groups, and more of the original questions, right? The original intent. So customer service, communications, trust, just generally how, and budget, of course, would be important questions there. So generally, how we're viewed, how, how we're doing from the perspective of the owner communities. One thing I did not mention is we have 3. I talked about two for owner communities. There is still one today with stakeholders and partners, so non-owner communities. Their set of questions is pretty similar, except not really digging as much into budget questions with the stakeholders and partners, since they're more removed from that. So definitely looking forward to their conversation as well today.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
I want to put these questions up on the board.
Really quick, Commissioner Rummel has her hand raised.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Rummel?
Hi, thank you. So back to Bill on the question of the change in not having a draft CIP. I come from the city approach, so I'm trying to think of how it's different for the district. So is it because people get focused on the numbers and that's the reason, because we get the clean water money in general, so it's a real like number as opposed to the city, which sort of guesstimates a number and then goes out for borrowing for those projects? Is that kind of one of the explanations?
Let me try to answer that in this way. I say we're not doing the draft CIP. What I really mean is we're not publishing that document. We're doing all of the work that led up to it. As I alluded to, we're putting together the schedule, we're estimating the financing. But the sort of formal publication of those numbers is held until the introduction of the budget. Does that get at your question? Right.
So then there's just one set of numbers and not the initial one and then the final one.
Yeah, that's correct. Because we find there aren't major changes between the draft and the final, but there are changes as we get more information, and it's better to have one set rather than 2.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
The question portion. So the first question is particularly about today. Do you have questions on this presentation? The other 3, you may or may not have anything today, but we'll sort of keep them fresh. Thinking about the role of the commission, one that will be particularly interested as we go on. What information do you need? What issues need to be resolved to get to the point of feeling comfortable approving the budget? And then, of course, at any point, technical questions about how things work, whatever. And I guess I'll just leave it open for whatever comments or questions people want to put out today.
Tom, go ahead.
So, being appointed by the towns, I just need to rely more on you for Amanda, for talking points and things like that, so that, and I think it becomes important that maybe we're all consistent what those points are. So I have to remember that before I start typing things out to the Towns Association. Amanda, what should I tell them?
That is very much appreciated, yes. And we will be providing talking points and just making sure that everyone, commissioners, staff, directors, that we are all reading from the same book, because there has been a concern in the past where there might be, to the point of CIP, different numbers, different takes, different talking points. So for us to all have a clear understanding, I think is really important, because if one owner community is told one thing and another, then that creates issues.
I had 2 other things. One is we were doing some communications while you were giving this presentation. There was a group of about 30 kids that were meeting out there, and I kept kind of looking outside, but you couldn't help it when, I don't know who was leading them, but they were very engaged in what was going on. So we're already starting our communication. And the other point, I don't remember.
Okay, Sarah?
Thanks. I have a couple buckets of questions and feedback as well. I think on the, no draft CIP in advance, published document wise, totally makes sense to me. It would be helpful, and it was super helpful today to go through the collection system, to kind of just through the next few months, to the degree that you all are working through, keep us up to date as you go down levels in that, right? Because the draft SIP allowed us to have a sense of where projects were at, and there's just so much information on projects that to get all of that along with the financials at budget time, I think it could be too much at once, because you're right, Bill, we are most concerned about the numbers, but I think we also get interested in the projects. And so I worry that if we're getting the project basically updates in the SIP at the same time that we're getting the numbers, we might get distracted by the exciting updates to the projects and not necessarily be focused on the numbers as much. So to the extent that perhaps there are major project updates that, God could come in and give us those updates before we get the full budget draft, it might just smooth our digestion process. And perhaps you're already thinking about that, but.
I'd like to draw you and others out a little bit more on this. What would be a good question here? What would be the headings or the main points in a presentation that meets the interest you're talking about?
So I think about, for a while, Bruce had always done our capital project updates. We weren't doing that. Now Lisa's doing them again, so I feel like we are back in the loop a little bit more on just how things are going, which is helpful, because sometimes when we're not in the work day to day, it's easy to forget how much is happening. And so to the degree that the budget is just our regular annual document that provides us an update on the number of projects that are currently underway and the ones that are in the plan, that takes a bunch of time to just remind ourselves of what's actually happening from a capital planning perspective. So I think the headlines for those updates are more related to, frankly, project status, and with an update on costs, the costs are pretty much where we thought they were going to be, or we're anticipating this project is going to be much more. And again, those things come in when the additional expenditure authorities come in. But the budget is the one time that we get more of a comprehensive view of how all those things are going. So it's in some ways less of a budget and planning update in many ways, and much more of a just capital projects update with a little bit more level of detail and segmenting that out so that we're not trying to do that understanding work at the same time that we're trying to understand the overall budget. Does that help? And maybe we can stay on this one before I go to my other topics.
So, I remember when Bruce used to give these, pretty sure he had some kind of mechanism to show where they, how big they were, and that meant how much they cost if we were on budget and if we were on time. It was just simple, and then he would pick out a few. I think what Commissioner Eskridge is trying to say is not to make the actual presentation more detailed so that it takes more time, but maybe the information that we get before would be more specific about that. This project, budget was this much, we're on budget, or we're going to be over budget, or something. I think that would help us. That's what I would add.
I concur with that, because today, we increased under the consent calendar, it was a few $1 million if I remember right when I read it over. And we're getting, it seems like you're getting a lot more of these. It's somewhat understandable because costs and materials and everything keep rising. And so it'd be nice to know where we sit, how these affect our overall scheme of things. We go in with a scheme and we have this money dollar set, then all of a sudden we're doing all these separate increases, and at some point, comes real money, and where does that make us sit, and how does that fit within our overall scheme of everything else? And I met with Carolyn Clow, who's the village president of McFarland, the head of the executive committee for the cities and villages, those that are served by MMSD, and then I think Sarah and Ken met with her as well 2 weeks later. And they want to be more engaged, and so they're talking about maybe having a meeting here and then doing a tour or something like that. But I had shared some of the information with Michael and Bill that Forbes a kind of a spreadsheet, and because they're wanting, part of it is they just want to know what they need to plan for earlier than what they're going to get. But the other thing is we get this tension, right? When I've been in the September meetings, when Michael's presenting the budget, they become aghast at like this 9% increase. And, they want that number lower. Then we have this tension between the projects that we should or need to do and the costs, and the costs invariably always seem to increase even after the budget's approved. That makes us keep that 9% increase. Because, when we try to figure out what do we want to cut, we go back to those kind of like that collection system matrix that we had up there. And, I don't think any one of us wants to be putting a yellow into an orange. That let's delay these projects, and then the next thing you know, they move from yellow to orange. And we've kind of had these discussions over time with the budget. So we as a commission have this tension that it's quite a bit of tension that we have to resolve at the commission meetings. And there were commission meetings. I don't think it happened with this commission, but the prior commission, as you'll remember, there was pressure to borrow from cash reserves in order to offset rate increases, and so you kind of get into this perfect storm of things because you're using cash reserves, and then all of a sudden you don't have a lot of cash reserves because you had higher costs and anticipated things like that, and you're drawing down your cash reserves even more. So that, and I don't know how we resolve. We're always going to have that tension, right? And I think the best thing is education to our customer communities in terms of this is the tension we face. Show them those charts, and we're in this yellow range here, and it's a standard that's accepted within the industry, right? And so this is where we are. We don't want to get into that orange, and we certainly don't want to get into the red. And we're pretty fortunate, when you think about it, what was it, 1% of the collection system projects were in the red. So we've been keeping on top of it. But to keep on top of it, we've been having cost increases that people don't like. But then it's going to be even worse if you have an overflow, right? If people's basements back up or something like that. It's kind of like an out of sight, out of mind thing. When the system's working well, nobody has a problem. And I go back to the electrical storms we had, that large storm that we had that it was taking a week for power to get restored to people's homes. And so I asked Michael at our Tuesday meeting, and he said, well, we have a couple portable generators, and they switched them around. Switch them around to different pump stations. Pull down the well, pump it out, move it to another one, then they go back. So, that's kind of what we've been doing, and that was successful for that storm, right? I think you said there were about 14 or so outages at different pump stations, I think between us and us helping Madison. So it's a complicated thing, but they did their job. And I want to thank all those people who are involved with that, because I think that's a lot of work, moving it back and forth and keeping on top of everything. But they did their jobs, And so we weren't in the press. You know, we miss one of those, then we're in the press. And I think that's what we have to show to our customer communities. Yeah, the costs are going up, but look, you know, we had an awful lot of sewers put in the 50s and 60s and early 70s with the suburban expansion that occurred within the region and nationally. We weren't, you know, we're following national trends. And those sewer, I mean, that's a lot of sewer. And then when you think that, yeah, they were built mainly of concrete and the concrete didn't last like we expected, you know, it's not cheap. And it's getting more expensive. So I sorry for the little bit of a rant, but I think there's that tension that's always ongoing, and people just don't quite understand it. You know, and every year when my wife gets our sewer and water bill and the village is blaming the sewer district, she asks me, what happened? So, yeah, so I got tension in my own household on this. Okay, Commissioner Rummel, you have a question, and then we'll go back to Tom.
I don't know if I have a question exactly, but I'm glad to follow you, Chair, because your rant I had a more succinct version of it, which is, I think the SIP should have some kind of maybe grid that says how many projects are in the yellow that we're fixing, how many are, you know, I mean, some percentage every year that we're allocating towards maintenance. I know, having served on the council for many years, the water utility stopped investing in like maintenance, and now everything's 100 years old and starting to, you know, randomly fail. And so we don't want to be there. And I thought that presentation earlier was really excellent to kind of show us how things fall in that continuum of risk versus, you know, the failure versus condition. So I think that should inform our SIP, like at least some amount of every budget has to be taking up those projects. And maybe the notation is more like we add notation about how this fits into this, you know, however we call this plan, and this is the, you know, part of the yellow, maybe we just call it the color section, you know, this is a yellow project, and, you know, but, you know, some years something will happen, something will fail, and then we have to be able to adjust. So clearly it's not only, you know, we have to leave room for unknown, but I guess that my point basically was that I think having the SIP tell us about our long-term plans will help do that communication piece that was mentioned by Amanda earlier. And I heard too, as a, you know, even on the level of the city council, like, what is the sewerage district doing with this increase, you know? And so we were late to come to the council too. So it shows up in our budget, an increase, because it's in your budget as an increase. So, you know, those kind of things do kind of trickle down to our customers as well as our individual households. Thank you.
Tom and then Greg. Tom, you had your light on.
Yes, I did. Okay, so I want to add on to what you were talking about, that it's part of our educational element too for these communities, because they all seem to bill a little different, and they all have their own internal costs, which they add on when they bill. So essentially, everybody's different. All of these communities. So it may be partly we need to know that, but they also need to understand something too from our perspective. You know, and we send that bill for services to them every quarter. They start to get concerned when they see an 8 or 9% increase to that projected for the next year. But they might also have that, they have a lot more residential units or commercial units that they're spreading it out to. So, you know, there isn't a one-for-one, oftentimes, equation for adding that increase to some. You know, that McFarland was really concerned about it, because I think they bill a different way. They may just add it onto the tax roll, as far as I know. I'm not sure. But we need to be aware that all those communities deal with that, and to be able to tell them this is not going to be the big killer to your levy or your any other budget portion that you have, your sewer utility costs that you might think. Just something to keep in mind.
So, Commissioner Freeze, I have just one question for Bill, that in terms of what I would like for feedback on how we're doing with the SIP. So we had, I think for this year, for 2024, we had a really big increase in our proposed projects, right? We took a big step forward, right? And what I would like, just as a check-in point, is to see how we're doing on meeting that target. And I'm not trying to point out, but I was a little bit skeptical that we were going to be able to do that, not from lack of desire, but from lack of just, that's a lot of the big meatball to try and chew down. And you know, and we have the same amount of staff to do that, right? So I'm just that would be somewhere along the line, you know, I don't know if I'd say quarterly, but maybe halfway through the year before we get to doing the next budget, to see how we're doing with what we guessed we were going to do last year.
Ezra?
Bill, I want to try to address your question from earlier. So when I think about it from an interest level, so I'm fully on board with not publishing a draft CIP, but I think interest-wise, the presentation that we used to get of that information is really useful. I thought I was seeing it when you have that spot on the timeline about the financial, where you're going to have informed by the municipal financial advisor, you're going to have both parts, capital needs and how we would fund it. So I thought my interest was met with what you proposed today. And you're nodding yes. It seems like you're in agreement. Yeah, which is great. So I mean, I think that helps with my interest. So I'll leave that there. The second piece I just want to touch on is about the customer community. So I'm game to plug in. I mean, I'll have to sort of work out what this looks like this year, but happy to talk with the person I'm most closely connected with, which is a deputy mayor at the city, and at the right spot and with all the information Amanda's going to feed us so that we say the right things. But, I'm happy to do that. But, let's sort of work it out this year. I also will point out, we're not going to have an ED. We're going to have an interim ED. But that's a person who probably would carry a lot of that role of communicating all that, I'm thinking, when we're back to full staff in future years. But that's something to think about. This year maybe is going to be a little different than other years because of the realities we're facing on the staffing front at the top. So we may need to carry a little more load than normally. I don't know, but I'm thinking out loud about that piece.
Well, I'm going to put you right into the list, Commissioner Meyer.
Sarah?
I'll go to my next bucket and then hopefully inspire more conversation. So I think you were nodding, Bill, when Ezra was saying that the financial update that you're planning for July would include probably a lot of this information. My concern with that is just that is, if we're talking the status of capital projects plus all the financial updates that I'm hoping we will dive into overall, it's maybe just too much information for one conversation. And so maybe it's just can we break that into a couple different meetings so that we have time to digest the information? Because my second bucket of kind of questions or feedback to answer your questions is related to kind of what additional financial information would be helpful. And for me, I'm very interested in some sort of overarching big picture timeline of how particularly capital financing works for the district again, and understanding how the Clean Water Fund and this lack of available funds in the Clean Water Fund influences that timeline, right? So we're moving forward with projects. It's a reimbursement-based fund. How much are we on the hook for that we don't know if we're going to get clean water funds for? Like that sort of overview, and looking forward, how do we, if we have different financing mixes, how are those timelines going to be different because they're not, reimbursement-based financing options like the Clean Water Fund is? That kind of big picture financing, and then impact on to the degree you understand it by July, reserve needs and things like that. Like that's the sort of deep dive into financials that I'm interested in. And it's a deep dive, but it's also just like a really fundamental step back of here's how the financing for MMSD has worked and how we think these changes in fund availability will change that. I think we need to spend a significant amount of time on that, and I think we need to bring our owner communities into that conversation as well. Perhaps y'all remind them that they can come, like, to the meeting where we're talking about that, and also do the other outreach. But that one in particular, I think they need to understand that as we're starting to understand it better.
So I want to follow up with that. All of our local communities, our owner communities, are worried about their levy limits, where they're going, and now we've had one less concern with our spending because of Clean Water Act and their low cost, and that is going to affect us. It's very similar to what they're seeing in a way with the levy limits, because we're going to have to spend more money for financing. It's going to affect our budget. So it'd be nice to see that, not necessarily to blame someone for that, but maybe to blame someone for that. You know, it seems odd that that money's not going to be available to us after, you know, all these years. And I think we should, if we need to know, if we can know that number, we should know it and we should share it.
The other thing I would add, Bill, too, is, Amanda, is the average cost for the end user based on the budget increase each year. Because I find myself getting caught up in the semantics of this percentage versus this. And district can have a 9% increase, and it might be $1.50, $2 per month to the end user, where a lot of our owner communities are looking at budgets where there's a 3% increase to the property taxpayer. They might be $30 a month. And I still find myself getting caught up in the semantics on that when our owner communities, I should say, look at that percentage and apply that thought process to their own budget process. And to me, it's a bit of an apples and oranges comparison.
When I was at Westport, my finance guy, that was his title. That was what I gave him as his title. He didn't worry about percentages. I mean, he just said, I want to know a number, because that's what's important to me. You can tell me this is a 9% change, but 9% of nothing is nothing. So I think that does become important. I'm glad you brought that up, Ken, so that we pass that kind of thing.
And I think that's a good point as well. If you remember our community values survey report from earlier this year, we did ask that question, how much would you pay, and in dollars, you know, and people are willing to pay more. And I think that's a very important distinction, that it's easier to understand, is this $1, $2, $5, $10 versus percent. And maybe I'm overstepping into Bill's department a little bit. You know, it is a little bit of challenging, to your point, Commissioner Wilson, is that all the communities bill different ways. So that's just one challenge for us to try to perhaps figure out how to overcome to figure that out.
I want to ask a follow-up question on this. One option we have is, we currently use our increase in service charges as kind of the headline number, the summary of the budget. One option is to use something else instead of that. I mean, obviously, it'd still be there, you can calculate it, but not have that be the headline. Is that the suggestion here?
I think the 9% increase per year for the foreseeable future is going to be a hot topic with our member communities, regardless of how the district handles that. I think the member communities are going to expect a lower than 9% increase for the foreseeable future. present the information a few different ways. I just think that topic that you've been hearing is not going away anytime soon, and I understand that.
Sarah?
I think that's why, to the points that you all made earlier, having the information to just basically justify, right? This is why, and that's where looking at our capital and facilities plan, all that information for us is so helpful. So the last kind of bucket of feedback that I have is around communications and commissioner engagement and engagement with our owner communities. And I think it would be helpful if we also not only segmented, right? We all represent, or we represent different owner communities as representatives on the commission, but also our owner communities have different folks who are interested in information and are probably interested in different information. And so it would be nice if we could also segment, we were talking to Carolyn about this a little bit when we were chatting, but the electeds want and need a different snapshot of information and justification than staff in our owner communities. And they probably need a different liaison to that information, because I'm probably in a much better position to talk to elected officials, because it's top line stuff, right? But when you get to their director of public works, or even maybe the finance folks on at an owner community, they're going to have a level of conversation where we probably aren't equipped to have that conversation without a member of the MMSD staff team present. And so it would also be helpful, I think, for us to make sure that our communications are appropriately segmented within our owner communities by the different roles of folks we're trying to reach out to in owner communities, just like we're segmenting our owner communities as opposed to like our stakeholder groups who also need information and want information on our budget and plans and things as well, like thinking about those groups differently. And then kind of following on that, you said, Tom, maybe we need someone to blame, but we also need someone to help us correct the situation. And so I know, I've heard a little bit about kind of some lobbying work that might be done, and I think that's another place where the commission can be helpful from a communications perspective, and us being liaisons to some of the electeds at these owner communities to help make our case with the legislature and others, and, for why Clean Water Fund is so important. That's where we can be helpful and, again, need a different type of information and communication strategy than our traditional annual budget communications plan.
Talking about the Clean Water Fund, Congress is back into the era of earmarks. And so the way I understand it is, the budget really didn't increase. A certain community in Wisconsin, for example, not a community, a sewage treatment plant, got a very large earmark, took away from the pot of money available for the Clean Water Fund. And so we're impacted by that sewer district's large earmark because of the way we increase the pot of money, So it just shows how everything becomes interrelated. I always thought earmarks were additional money, but they're not. They took out of the pot. And we have now been negatively affected by that sewer district.
That's fascinating, Tom, and I think important additional context for us when we're understanding the situation that we're in. And again, maybe this is not a question necessarily for the budget cycle in particular, but a request for information and conversation as a commission as to how we got to this place, what's the strategy around it, how are we collaborating with other sewage treatment plants across the state. And so a separate agenda item maybe on our upcoming agenda for the commission would be digging into a little bit more of how we got here and what we're gonna do about it.
Part of what we're doing is we're having to go out and bond. But for long term, what does it mean? Yeah. Brad?
Yeah, great discussion. I think the proposed, schedule, sounds good. I personally don't need to see the draft CIP when we used to see it. It would be helpful to at least see a list of the projects that, are anticipated to be in the CIP when we get it. And I don't know if you were planning to do that or not. Your financial presentation is scheduled for July, and from my recollection of the schedule, you were in the process of kind of putting together that draft CIP in May, June. It's June, it's already the end of May. But I don't need to see the numbers, but a list of the projects that are anticipated to be in the CIP. When we do see it, it would be helpful to get that as early as, and I don't know if that's possible to show that in July or not, but that's what I think might be helpful for me anyway.
I want to ask a follow-up here similar to the one I asked of Commissioner Eskridge, so that we know what to provide. What's the interest there? What kind of information are you looking for? Just literally a list, or detail on the projects, or options?
Yeah, basically a status of where you're at that point in July, and a list of the actual projects, and possibly a map showing their location. And if you have the year that the projects are anticipated to be funded and built, great. If you don't have that at that point, I mean, I'm just looking for a kind of a snapshot of where you're at with the CIP in July. And I don't want you to go to the extent of having to try to do a published draft document, which I understand was the source of the additional staff work. And also don't want you to produce the numbers, the draft numbers, because you said there's concern about them changing. So, but a list, the year, map is, I think, would be helpful, at least for me.
And I think that adds on to what was earlier commented about what the project was budgeted at and what it is stands at now. So we kind of get this broad picture of how, not what it was in the CIP, but what it was budgeted at, and then where the project stands now.
Well, I think throughout the year it would be very helpful, as some members of the commission had stated, to receive a presentation on where things are at with the capital budget, the location of projects. I think having the maps showing the location, as well as an indication of the relative size of the project, and whether it's on track or concern. I recall a red, yellow, green kind of map that I found to be very helpful. Very quick presentations. Didn't take a lot of time to go through the individual projects as much as it was an overview of where the entire capital budget was at.
Let me confirm. We're getting instructions to two different groups of people. One for Lisa Coleman, Director of Engineering, to have her updates have this form you're describing.
Right.
And the other is to Todd, Jen, my department, to give a preview of forthcoming projects in the CIP at a high level.
Right. Yeah, two different things. One related to the preparation of the CIP and the budget. The other kind of an ongoing status report on the status of the capital budget throughout the year.
Okay, Tom, and then Marcia, did you have another comment? We'll go to Tom, and then I saw Marcia pop up, but she popped away, so. Tom?
Okay, I'm just needing a clarification, because this is how my brain works. There's still a CIP. You're required to do a CIP. We're just not publishing this pretty document that then people point at and say, you were gonna do this in this year and spend this much money, why aren't you doing that? I mean, that document is going away, thank the gods, correct?
Yes, the draft published version is, but the
Yeah.
final printed budget includes all of that information.
I understand that.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that we're all on there's still going to be a draft CIP. There has to be. I mean, right, it's not gonna be published, but there's still going to be
There's a,
a capital improvement plan.
There's
It's
a-
just not gonna be.
right, there's a capital improvement plan before we adopt it that never goes public.
Exactly.
And then we still adopt the capital improvement plan, correct?
Yes, yes. I just wanted to make sure that it sounded like we've kind of been talking around this. We're just not gonna have that document that's going to thinking that it's the final. Okay.
Ezra?
Bill, I'm looking at last July's presentation of the 2024 draft CIP. Something just like that looks pretty darn good to me. I might ask you if would you like to do something different than that? Are you looking to streamline or do something different with that process? Because I feel like the interest I'm raising, and I think I heard Brad saying more or less the same thing, boy, this presentation looks real good, but how would you like it to be different if you had your wish?
I just got a wink and a nod from Todd. We can do something very similar.
Okay, Marcia, did you have a question?
I'll call it a question. Can we do some kind of formal written statement and or offer either a commissioner or someone like Bill to go to our owner communities to present what we know, say in September or at some point when it's more final, our proposed rate increase and answer questions? I'm thinking, like, I serve on the City of Madison Finance Committee, and we do a lot of budget work, as Sarah will remember. And again, because it will show up in our budget that these increases are going to affect our budget, it might be useful to at least have an item on the agenda that's a statement from the commission or the, management of the utility, something for us to look at and, answer and have questions answered. Or offer this as something to other owner communities. I think, I would urge that you come to the Madison Finance Committee if we could figure out how to do it that made sense.
So 2 comments. We started last year producing an estimate of what the service charges would be for each community, even before we finalize the budget. And I emphasize estimate there because if the budget changes, those charges change. So we have been trying to do, I think, what you're addressing. Maybe the other component is what Amanda talked about earlier, regular meetings with community leaders, staff, whoever is appropriate to talk about the specifics of the budget.
Yeah, and this is Amanda, and I'll just add, I know that we do a presentation to DCCBA Executive Council right around when we do our budget introduction here to Commission. I believe the Towns Association as well. I do not know what engagement specifically with the City of Madison. Michael, I would kind of ping you on that one. I don't know that we've done much, but I hear loud and clear that we have a standing offer to do that. So figure out a way to do that.
Okay, I just have one comment. Bill, when I was making early on in your presentation, I kind of interrupted you to bring up the point about that we broke away from large projects. You're kind of, the way you're reacting was kind of, do you think we should be moving back to really large scale plants? Is that what the staff, or do they like the idea that we're trying to piecemeal it, bit by bit, so everything's all up at the same time for reconstruction?
My facial expression was because our operations manager, Mr. Grooms, is in the line of sight and he was smiling while you were talking. This issue is something we talk about internally. There's sort of a debate, what's the best way to go, larger, smaller, break them out. You're correct. Before I got here, we sort of moved away from the very large addition. There are downsides to the large addition. They tend to be dumping grounds for things that aren't evaluated. There are upsides to them. It's sort of easier to manage a larger project in one sense. I guess I don't really have a comment here about what's best or not, but it's something we're very aware of and talk about and think about.
Okay. I was just wondering where that was in terms of thought process, because I understand that. I think one thing about breaking the projects out, I think the commission has a better understanding. When they were doing those large additions, we as a commission didn't know really what was all encompassed in those additions. And then the next thing you know, they did something in one edition and they were having to correct it in the next edition. That was very disconcerting to me as a commissioner, because you didn't even know what they were doing in that one edition that now they had to correct.
I think that you're getting close to wrapping up. I'm just going to ask for clarity, because this has been a very robust conversation, and maybe Bill has it all, but I thought maybe you could summarize like what the walkaways, what the guidance is, so there's clarity and a little bit of repetition, because the discussion's been very, very robust today.
I wasn't keeping notes, but
I
Bill,
was keeping notes, and they are 6 pages so far with a relatively large hand. So I guess my suggestion here is that we huddle afterwards and write this in the minutes and then get confirmation next time via the minutes process.
Michael?
I found it go ahead, Sarah. Found it interesting wanting to go back to the Borelli report and that image he did, and there's actually a science to that. I know that those of you who've read Edward Tufte's books on how to present complex information in simple ways, that is the art of what Bruce did, and it's really easy. It's good to hear that some of that resonates. Go back to some of that.
Okay. Any further discussion on this topic or comments? I think we had a very good discussion, and we'll look forward to seeing the minutes. I think basically it was kind of a present snapshot of projects that have been budgeted or upcoming, where projects sit in terms of cost, timing, and things like that. And I'm sure Bill will get that correct. Let's see. That takes us to the Executive Director's report. Michael?
I'll defer to Marty, who has a report and update for us.
Oh, Marty, you're going to talk about the Water Quality Plan Amendment?
All right, good morning, everyone. Marty Griffin, Ecosystem Services Director. So I'm just here to give a quick update on the process for the area-wide water quality plan modification process with CARPC. So as you all remember, through the approval, the commission approved, and DNR also approved our final compliance alternatives plan. That's for our phosphorus compliance. That recommendation was to consolidate the outfalls to a single outfall in Badfish Creek. So because that's our compliance, or preferred compliance, we need to update the point source inventory that's housed as part of the area-wide water quality plan for Dane County, right? So part of the area-wide water quality plan for Dane County, that's a water quality management process established by DNR, and that plan does a lot of different things. But one of the things it does is it establishes a point source inventory. So we need to modify that. And if you all recall in history, that was amended to actually put the outfall there in the first place in Badger Mill Creek. So now we need to modify that amendment to update the inventory to the recommended compliance alternative. So how does this work? We submit our modification request to CARPC and DNR. That starts a 90-day process. DNR contracts with CARPC for a public process as part of that. CARPC then and DNR do a review. CARPC provides a recommendation to DNR, but DNR has the final review and decision. So far we've met individually with DNR and CARPC to make sure we're all understanding this process, because this is new. This has never happened before. There's never been a modification of an area-wide water quality plan to eliminate a point source, right? So it's a new thing. We want to make sure we're all on the same page with the process, the timeline, and specifically the scope of information that's going to be necessary for the final decision. So it'll help us as a district package together what CARB-C and DNR needs to make that decision. So we did that, which was great. We got a common understanding. We also met specifically with technical staff with CARB-C and DNR to get pre-submittal draft conversation. So the district created a draft, and we had a pre-submittal meeting just to make sure what we understood through our previous conversations actually materialized in our report. So that was good to get us on the same page. And then we also, DNR, CARB-C, and the district all agreed on a timeline for this. So we're planning on submitting our modification request to CARB-C in June, and that'll help us have a decision from DNR by September. And we felt, DNR and us felt that that was important because our WPDS discharge permit is coming up for expiration in March of 2025, which means we need to apply for our new permit in the fall of this year. October 2nd, I believe, is the deadline. So we wanted to make sure that this piece of the process, consolidating outfalls, was wrapped up before we entered the next piece of the process, which is actually regulating through permit that consolidation, right? So that's our timeline and process. So I'll entertain any questions, but that's what's happening.
Okay, I got a question, Marty. Thank you for that. How is it going with, we did have opposition when a year ago we were acting to remove the discharge point. And then you've had the meetings with the Badger Mill Creek people. Do you think they're all on board? Or do you think we're going to face opposition at hearings when CARB-C has their hearing?
Thanks for that question. So yeah, we have been meeting with our stakeholder group, and it was mentioned in the stakeholder group that through the public process that CARB-C is going to run, there will be folks voicing opposition to the modification of area-wide water quality plan.
So I just want to make the point that we put out, like it was $1 million, that if the CARB-C and DNR don't approve our modification, that $1 million is no longer there. I hope everybody understands that, right? If DNR says, no, you got to continue the discharge, $1 million goes away. So,
yes, I think that's very clear that stakeholder process to do other things with the stream for health and resiliency is because of the consolidation, right? When we weren't doing it for any other reason because of that, so I think that's understood. But I don't think it means that the work of the stakeholder group would be for nothing if that happened. I mean, we'd have great information to help the stream, so yeah.
We were going to put in $1 million to do changes to stream quality because of our removal of the discharge point. And I just hope they don't expect that we're going to still, if we have to still discharge, or we're putting in $1 million, still putting in an additional $1 million, because we'll be spending, I don't know how many million to meet the water quality objective. Sarah?
Thanks. Thanks for that question. If it is helpful, this is maybe a place where, again, if bringing in the commission's voice in the public process would be helpful, just an offer. I think, happy to show up somewhere, talk about the process that we underwent, the decision-making that we came to as a commission and why. Maybe that's we could all get on the same page from a talking points perspective. I look towards Amanda. But if that would be helpful, or submission of comments on what we did as a commission as part of the CARB-C process, happy to engage in supporting in that way. So to whatever extent it's useful, Marty, just keep us, I think, posted on what would be helpful.
Great, thank you, appreciate that offer.
Yep, and additionally, I think it's important to make sure that all of our member communities, owner communities, are aware of the process and informed, have an opportunity to provide their input.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Otherwise, those 9% increases could go up substantially. Okay, so operations report, Alan?
Good morning, Commissioners. Alan Grooms, Operations Manager for the district. I'll be doing the April plant performance report metrics momentarily. We're good to go. I can't advance. There we go. Thank you. Sorry, this isn't. So for the month of April, we were in good shape on across the board on the metrics. CBA-5 was quite low, 2.1. That's kind of below even the historical range for that. Kind of in line with that, suspended solids is also quite low. Phosphorus tracks, being a biological phosphorus treatment plant, the phosphorus tracks pretty closely with the suspended solids generally. So those are all at the low end of the range. Ammonia was a little higher. We've been seeing a little bit higher, as I've mentioned a few times, higher nitrogen loads at the plant overall. We're also, in the springtime, April, we're still kind of transitioning through there, so that tends to be a little bit worse treatment there. We grow accustomed to numbers that are like in the 0.2 milligram per liter range. Still well below the permit average of 3.8. That does drop in the summertime, so we are in the month of May and on through September, we're running at a tighter limit there, but still even at that 0.4, were that to continue. And generally that drops a little bit. Warmer weather, you get a little bit better, faster treatment there with that, so that number usually comes down in the summer. So we're in good shape with the limits there. Chloride, fecals were exceptionally good, as you saw, 20.25. We are in the process starting in May, some point probably towards the end of the summer, I or somebody will maybe provide a comment on that, but we are gathering information now with the laboratory for E. coli, which will be under our new permit is expected to be the governing criteria. So there'll be a switch in that, and those graphs, we may have to adjust those, how those look when that time comes. But generally, it was great performance for the month of April. I don't know if anyone has any questions on this. Okay, next slide. Oh, is that it? All right.
Thank you, Alan. That was quick. Paul?
Yes, so this is the meeting where we talk about kind of legal services, and we're looking at April time. April was another busy month. I know not that long ago, we talked about legal services trying to average 35 hours a month and not quite hit that target, and April was 53 hours. So there's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of contract things. There have been RFPs on things including real estate acquisition, IT agreements, municipal advisor, but there's also been DOT right-of-way and other kind of standard contract issues. My partner, Chris Hughes, has been taking the lead on that, and I know this month has several things that he's working on with Lisa and others. So that continues to be a busy area. There are a number of HR items. Pam Plur in our office is one of those. Some simple public records questions, and then some more challenging employment issues that she's been coordinating with Mike on. And then from a regulatory standpoint, a number of things. I mean, we had some of the Clean Water Fund stuff that we're following up on. There were some pre-treatment issues, Badger Mill Creek. There's the ongoing issue with respect to the lagoon and sampling and EPA's involvement, taking a look at how much work they want done in conjunction with the berm enhancement that we're trying to do. And there have been some wetland issues. I think Bill had talked about, how much of our infrastructure is accessible. Well, if it's not accessible, that involves dealing with wetlands, and how do we come up with a regulatory strategy to talk to our friends at DNR about balance between wetland protection and accessibility. So we're starting to have some of those discussions. And then, a number of kind of general items ranging from the per diem discussion on commission compensation and just other general meetings. So busy month, but a lot of interesting stuff.
Okay. Any questions for Paul? None? Thank you. That takes us, excuse me, to the future meeting schedule. So our next meeting will be in person on June 13th. That is Michael's last meeting with the commission. So I would like to see if we can get everybody who's able to be here, the commissioners, for that meeting. I would think that we probably are planning basically pretty much all summer in-person meetings. And as I said earlier, I'm suspecting the subcommittee will start meeting again at 7:30 a.m. on that our last meeting in June. I don't remember the date. And then there'll probably see how things go through that into August and so forth. And so I think as I've said, the hope is that we will have somebody selected by December or in December. So it'd be about the same time like Michael had. We selected him in December and started in January, if I remember right. So, just to kind of give you that heads up on so look for in-person meetings probably for the foreseeable future, and if stuff changes, we'll let you know. Any other business? Adjournment? Motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by Commissioner Clark.
Clark, second. It's scripted now.
To adjourn. All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Bye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much.